I'm going to kind of take it as a given that you're in the room because you have a sort of a vested interest in this thing called selling. Because if you haven't, I would suggest you probably want to leave now, because that's all I'm going to talk about for the next 20 minutes. I want you to put yourself in a situation where you're having a conversation with a prospect. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what the terminology of prospect is someone who looks like, sounds like, feels like the sort of person that would buy what you've got. And you have a fantastic conversation with them. You tell them how fab you are and how great your product and service is. And at the end of that conversation, they say to you, well, that's really interesting. Give me a couple of days to think that over. And you give them a couple of days. And then what you find 48 hours later is that they're on a completely different time zone to you. I don't know if you ever noticed that. You try and get back in touch with them after 2 days, and their 2 days is never 2 days. Their 2 days is normally 2 weeks. Sometimes it can be 2 months. When I started selling in 1998, I'm still waiting for people to call me back from then. Very frustrating when that kind of thing happens. Let me ask you to think about another scenario as well. And the other scenario I'd ask you to think about is this. Imagine you're having a conversation, this time with what I call a qualified prospect. And a qualified prospect is someone who looks like, sounds like, feels like the sort of person that would buy what you've got, but they're one stage further, in so much as they've actually got cash and they've got the authority to spend that money. How fab is that? And you have this great conversation with them about your product and service. You tell them how cool you are. And at the end of that conversation, they say, that's really interesting. Can you send me a quotation? And you do that. You document your stupidity by sending them what your price is. They return on email and say, thanks very much. Give me a couple of days to think that over. And you go, oh, I'm not falling for that one again. So you give them a couple of weeks. And this amazing thing happens in 2 weeks' time. Right at the same time you're about to pick up the phone and speak to them, the rings of Saturn align themselves with the lunar eclipse. There's a cosmic vibration in the supernova which disrupts the planetary infrastructure right at the moment you dial their number, which makes them pick the phone up. Bizarre, it never happens normally like that. They pick the phone up and they go, hello? Now, you've got 3 choices at that moment in time when you're following up after your quotational proposal. You have 3 choices. The first choice you have, and if you're not trained in the world of sales, my advice to everybody is don't pick the phone up. Put the phone down. Run for your life as quick as you can. Because those people will probably forget about you in about 2 or 3 weeks' time, which is great news for you, because that means in 3 weeks after that, you can try again. The second thing that normally happens is most people say, no, I'll take that one on. And the phone conversation goes a little bit like this. They go, hello, and you go, yes, it's me. Sorry, it's Matt. Yeah, I'm the guy who I've been sending you emails over the last 2 weeks trying to catch up with you. And they go, sorry, I don't know who you are. Well, I was the guy that, we sort of got, and I sent you that, we had that conversation thing. It was great about my product and service and how brilliant I am. And I sent you that quote. If you remember I don't suppose you've had a chance to look at that quote yet, have you? Now, sensing your confidence in your product, they say, actually, yeah, I've had a quick look at it, and I'm afraid it's too expensive. And at that point, of course, you have 2 choices to make. You can either hang up, a bit like the first person, and call it quits and say, oh, well, never mind, I tried. Or you can take them on and have a conversation with them about the price. And they say to you, it's too expensive. And you go, well, by how much? And they go, lots. And you go, well, where have I got to be? And they go, really low. And of course, what we've started there is the race to the bottom. And I don't know if you've ever been in that situation before. Incredibly frustrating. I certainly have. And what I'd like to try and do for you over the next 15, 20 minutes tops is try and at least show you some ways in which we can find a way of combating that problem. So for those of you in this room that are in charge of your own business or have a vested interest in selling and do on occasions get people pushing back and saying to you it's too expensive, I'd kind of like to give you a few options if I can of how you might be able to mitigate those risks. So, for those of you I had the privilege of meeting, I run a sales training company called Sales Cadence. When I'm not training people around the UK and parts of Europe, then I'm selling. So everything that I teach, I sell first of all. When I'm not selling, I'm talking about sales. I love the subject matter. So if I'm not in environments like this talking to lovely people like you, then I talk to myself quite a bit. I have a podcast as well. And if you're interested in listening to podcasts, then jump on the website and have a look at that. And if I'm not talking about sales, then I'm writing about the subject matter as well. I published my first book in 2017 called Sales Glue, and I'm about to launch my second book in 2020. So it's fair to say I have a really vested interest in this topic of selling. So quick question for you guys in the room. Who here is in a sales role? It's a bit like saying, who here's an axe murderer? Okay, one or two, which is fine. I happen to believe that everybody in this room's in sales. We're all selling something. And when I ask that or positively challenge a room with a statement like that, I normally get 3 different looks. First look I get is utter contempt. Actually, that's the third one. The first look I get is confusion. Some people always go, oh, sales, hang on a second, am I in the wrong talk? Where's the guy with the red shoes? Shouldn't he be here? The second look I get from people is the kind of acceptance. Yeah, we are all in sales. We're all selling something. You know, we're selling ourselves on a daily basis. And if ever you've been in a situation where you've had to influence somebody or gain willing cooperation from somebody, those, of course, are the 2 key fundamental skills of anybody that sells for a living. And then the third look I get, which is quite an interesting look, is the look of contempt, which is the Norfolk barricade goes up, chin goes on the chest. I say, you can forget it, son. I'm not in sales. I'm an accountant. Either way we look at it, I genuinely believe everybody's in sales, we're all selling something. But who actually in this room has got a sales job with the word sales in their title? Anybody? 2 or 3 people, brilliant. Anyone done telesales? 1 or 2 people have done telesales. I've got a really good friend of mine who works in the telesales industry. He works at Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. I don't know if you follow football. They've been having a bit of trouble recently, not particularly playing too well. So their customer helpline has set up this call centre line for anybody who wants to complain about the state of the football. I'll give you that number. It's 0800 10 10 10. Any Spurs fans in? Okay, that number again, 0800 1-0, 1-0, 1-0. You liked that one, didn't you? I'm surprised myself sometimes with some of these jokes. None of my material, by the way. Anyone done door-to-door? Door-to-door, you tried it? How did you get on? It was interesting. I tried it once, didn't get on with it, if I'm honest with you, but don't let me stop anybody else. Literally, do not knock it till you've tried it. That would be my advice to everybody in the room. But on that point, I might just very, very quickly tell you this quick story about door-to-door. Saturday morning, I'm at home, there's a knock at the door. Open the door, it's a Jehovah's Witness. Lovely guy. He says, young man, I'd like to talk to you about a VIP ticket to follow me towards the kingdom of heaven. And I said, mate, I'm so interested in that sales pitch. You need to come in and tell me all about it. So I invited him into my house. I made him feel comfortable, took his hat, his scarf, his long trench coat, his leather bag with his leaflets in it, stab vest, took all those things off, made him a cup of tea, got him comfortable, sat him down at the table, and I go, right, I'm all yours. What happens next? And he says, I've no idea. I've never got this far. And that, for me, is a perfect example of us finding ourselves in a situation where we kind of think we know something should happen next, but we don't know what to do next. And that's really what I want to try and help you with right now. Because I genuinely believe that selling is a very simple thing that we overcomplicate. Selling people or helping people buy is a logical process that for whatever reason, we add stuff in, we skip bits, we miss bits out, and the more we do stuff like that, the harder it is for people to understand what the Scooby-Doo it is that we're talking about. So here's how I'd like to try and help you if I can. There are 2 ways to sell. The first way is manipulation. I want to give you a quick example of what I think manipulation is in terms of selling. Could I have a volunteer, please? Who would like to come up here to the front of the stage? And I'll guarantee you 2 things if you do. John, you're my man. 2 things that I would guarantee. The first thing is your reputation will be intact. It will be intact. Will be intact. Always get that bit wrong. And the second thing is you have the opportunity. John, come and join me. You have the opportunity to tell everybody what you do, but you only got 10 seconds to do it. So it's John, isn't it? I just met John a little bit earlier, so this is not a setup by any means. He was the first guy, and God bless him. Just give John a round of applause. John, good to see you, sir.
Thanks.
Very, very briefly, in less than 10 seconds, just tell everybody in this room what you do.
I help people.
He helps people. That was a quick pitch, wasn't it? Fantastic. Right, John, here's how it works. Manipulation. I guess you're familiar with a pack of cards.
I am.
How many cards in a pack of cards?
52.
Perfect. Now tell John, everybody in this room, what are the 4 suits in a pack of cards?
Spades, diamonds, clubs, and hearts.
Brilliant. Spades, diamonds, clubs, and hearts. Now, John, of those 4, can you pick 2 and tell the audience?
Hearts and clubs.
Hearts and clubs. And which 2 didn't you pick?
Spades and diamonds.
Right, spades and diamonds. Now, of those two, pick one.
Spades.
Spades, right. So everyone remember the spades, okay. Now, I want you to pick a number of a card, okay. Make it easy, because we've got the girls from Indigo Swan about to come on. 2, 4, 6, 8. Pick two of those numbers and tell the audience.
6 and 8.
6 and 8. And which two didn't you pick?
2 and 4.
And of 2 and 4, pick one.
2.
Which number did you leave behind?
4.
What's the card that we've just talked about then?
I've forgotten.
What card did he pick? The 4 of spades. It's always the 4 of spades, and that was the exact card that I was thinking of, John. Give John a round of applause. Well done, John. Go and have a sit down. Now, you're all thinking that was a little bit too easy, saying things like that. Well, somewhere here I think we've got... Oh, there's a 4 of spades, yeah. I knew it was here somewhere. And that's an interesting example of how you can manipulate a conversation towards the outcome that you're after. We did have a very brief conversation before the rest of you guys came in earlier this morning, and we were talking about a gentleman called Stephen Covey. He's got a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Some of you may have read it. One of those habits is start with the end in mind. Okay? And all we do when we manipulate, and again, manipulate is not something that I would advise any of you people to do, but I do want to pick out one positive from manipulation. Starting with the end in mind is exactly what John and I did in that conversation. I always knew it was the 4 of spades, and all I do is ask him questions and direct the conversation towards that subject matter. And it's exactly the same with you and the way that you engage with people and talk about your product or service. Of course, it's not about being salesy or manipulating people, but you do have to have somewhere to go to. Make sense? Without that, conversations tend to last forever, and we meander. And some of the reasons we might get pushbacks in the past, in the future rather, is because we don't know where we're going when we have the conversation. I never go into a room unless I know how to get out of it. It's a figure of speech, and I would imagine it's exactly the same for all of you. So the first one is manipulation. John, can I just say thank you very much indeed for helping me out. I want to give you a gift for doing that. I'll give you a book from one of my very, very favourite authors. That's me. So enjoy that with my absolute pleasure, sir. You're most welcome. Okay, let's get on to the second one, which is motivation. And motivation really is having a motive to inspire action. And I would heavily encourage everybody in this room that the right course of action is as much motivation as possible. What I've learned in life is, over sort of 21 years of working in the B2B sales space, the last 6 years of training people, is that the easiest way to help people buy what you got is to work exactly the same way that they buy things. And everybody in this room is a buyer. And we can all probably agree with the logic I'm about to share with you, which is this. We all go through a staged process when we buy things. The very first thing that we do is we identify ourselves. Okay? Now, despite the fact that we both look fantastic, I haven't always looked this trim. I'll be perfectly honest with you. When I left the corporate employment world in 2013, I was probably 3 stone heavier. Spent a lot of my time behind the car, eating lots of motorway food, late nights at the bar with customers, piled on a few pounds. And my wife said to me once, Matt, you're looking really overweight. I'm a bit worried about the fact that you're sort of mid-40s. Can you go and get a checkup? So I went to see the doctor. The doctor checked me out, and he said, yeah, to be fair, your wife's right. You are, based on your height and your BMI, you are clinically obese. You need to lose at least 2, maybe 3 stone. I said, well, doc, I mean, what do you suggest? I'm in your hands. You're the expert. He said, well, let's start with diet. Don't eat anything fatty. And I said, what, give up the pork pies, sausage rolls, crisps, that kind of thing? He said, no, don't eat anything fatty. I thought, well, that's a little bit harsh. I said, I think you'll find it's genetics. It runs in the family. He said, I think you'll find nothing runs in your family, mate. Anyway, so there I took his advice, and after about 3 months, I'd lost a couple of stone. Now, the net result of that was some of my suits didn't fit. And when we talk about identifying ourselves, or the word that we use in the sales industry and perhaps in marketing as well, those of you who are familiar, is ideal customer profile. And you will all have an ideal customer profile in mind for the people that buy from you, correct? Yeah, well, we're exactly the same when we buy things. We identify ourselves as being a shopper. And for me personally, I no longer shop at H&M and Topman. I'm a John Lewis kind of guy. That's where I spend most of my time. So the very first thing that we do is we identify ourselves. The next thing that happens is I don't just go to John Lewis because it seems like a good idea. There has to be a reason. And the reason is I want to buy a suit. Obvious when you think about it. The reason is sometimes referred to as a problem, because the other thing I've learned over 21 years is people only buy 2 things. They buy a solution to a problem, or they buy an improvement to something that already exists. And it's exactly the same for you. If you think about it, what you're effectively doing is solving problems for people or improving their life in some way, shape or form. And we've all got problems in this room. You know, if we had time and I said, go on, then think about a business problem you've got, we'd have loads of problems coming out. You know, you've probably got a problem in your mind right now that you don't quite know how to fix. I'll give you an example of one I've got. I've got a dog, it's a lovely dog, cross between a Rottweiler and a St. Bernard. And every time I take him for a walk and I let him off the lead, he bites me on the shin and then he runs off for help. And it's most embarrassing. It's a real problem. And if I knew how to solve that problem, if I could find someone who knew how to train dogs, I'd pay them. Money, no object. So we need to understand what the reason is. I go to John Lewis, my reason is I want to buy a suit. The next thing that happens, and this is all logical stuff, isn't it? And there's nothing hard, it's not difficult, is I find the suit. Find the suit that fits, it's a lovely grey check, it feels good, everything's happy, and away we go and I tend to buy it. And that's a very logical step that buyers go through, that we all go through when we buy things. But let me show you how salespeople confuse that, and how we start to make it difficult for ourselves by not using that simple sequence. The very first thing that happens, certainly with the people that I spend time training with at the start, is they fail to understand who their ideal customer profile is. And most salespeople would think that they can sell anything to anybody. Have you noticed that? You know, and they really fill their pipeline and their diary up with people who they're not entirely sure they've got any chance whatsoever having a conversation with. You know, and they get so many people trying to get from them, if you like, free advice and information. They don't realise it. Sometimes referred to as unpaid consultancy work. And that's because they don't get super sharp on who their customer is. The next thing that happens is they make life really, really difficult for themselves, is because they don't challenge back when someone comes to them with a problem. I'll give you an example. Obviously, I work in the sales training world. Let's say, for example, someone came to me and said, yeah, we'd like some help with some negotiation training, please. We're in a really difficult market, lots of competition. You know, we send out loads of quotes, and quite often we're asked to reduce our price. We'd like to get really good at negotiating so that we don't negotiate too much price away. Can I just say to you, by the way, on that point, negotiation is the work of the devil. Go nowhere near it. Because I don't know about you, the price only goes in one direction in a negotiation. Avoid it like the plague if I was you. Stick with selling. So they fail to push back and ask the reason, well, why do you think you need negotiation training? They don't do that because they wear these things called sales ears, which shut down after they've heard the first response. And they go, negotiation training? I've got one of those courses. Come on my Negotiation Ninja Networking course, £1,997, ka-ching, sign here please. And what happens at that point is, of course, is that the buyer, the customer, is confused. They feel like, hang on a second, you haven't really listened to me, haven't really understood my problem, and there's a lack of conviction, and they're not convinced. Newsflash, a convinced buyer buys nothing. And because people don't push back enough, people don't feel as if they've been listened to. And then the third thing, of course, is so keen are sellers to get onto the selling part, their solution, that what happens next when they get the chance is they vomit features and benefits all over people. And if you've been on the receiving end of that, a bit like being at a networking event at the chamber, it's really, really terrible, isn't it? My apologies. It's not like that. The chamber is very, very good here. But yeah, they vomit features and benefits. We do this and we do that and we do the other. We're great at this, we're great at the other. It's awful being weed on. I don't know anybody I've met who likes being thrown up over and then weed all over. It's awful. But that's what salespeople do. And the challenge that then comes, of course, is an unconvinced buyer who feels like they're being weed and vomited all over, pushes back and says, no thanks, it's not for me. Most buyers actually haven't got the courage to say no. Don't know if you've noticed that. Most buyers give you an excuse. Come and see me in a couple of days, which is code word for get lost, but I haven't got the balls to tell you. Sometimes they say it's too expensive, but again, it's pretty much the same kind of thing. So you can start to see how the untrained then is challenging the logical way in which people buy and making life difficult for themselves. And it's no surprise to me then that what happens is we receive these things called objections. So how can we solve that problem? I've got 5 minutes. Let me tell you how we can solve that problem. Here's three things that I'd like you to take away from this workshop, if nothing else. The first thing I'd like you to think about is this important point about ideal customer profile. Okay, you really need to start getting super sharp on who the right customer is for you, because has anybody in this room got a customer they wish they didn't have? 1 or 2 nods, yeah. Clearly they're not your ideal customer profile. Get super sharp on the demographic, the geographic, the psychographic values of the people that buy from you. And start looking out for them. There's a part of the brain called the reticular activating system. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it filters out the things that you don't want and it locks onto the things that you do want. When you get super clear on who your ideal customer profile is, the first thing I'd like you to do is go out and disqualify everybody that doesn't meet that ideal customer profile. Stop wasting your time with people who are tire kickers, who all they want from you is your price. Free information that's of value to them, value to you that you give away for nothing. Push back, don't give it to them. Unless, of course, they fit that ideal customer profile. So have a mindset of disqualification. The next thing that needs to happen in there, before we can even start to ask them questions about the reason why they're in the room in the first place, you need to protect yourself. And you need to protect them as well. It's a bit like wearing a sales condom. You sort of know each other, but you don't know each other intimately. So you need to put these rules in place. Has anyone been to a meeting? Work of the devil? Anyone still go to meetings? More work of the devil. So, but you know what it's like when you go to a meeting and there's no agenda? It's like, it's all over the place, isn't it? It goes on forever, we go in different directions. Exactly the same thing here. What I'm asking and inviting you to consider is bringing in an agenda. And the word that I would put in there is rules. You need a set of rules. So before you even start asking questions about reasons, you say, listen, Mr. Prospect, there's no idea in my mind whether or not I can help you, or more importantly, from your perspective, whether you'd like me to. But let's just pretend in 25 minutes' time when we finish this conversation that you and I find something in common where it feels like we should have another conversation. At the end of that 20 minutes, all I'm suggesting that we both do is take action. How does that sound? And they'll say yes to that. Because most prospects I've found will do whatever you want if you give them information in advance. And by setting up what's going to happen at the end, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, John, what you're essentially doing is closing them. And what I'm not suggesting for a minute is you're actually going to get them to buy. Far from it. That can't happen till way down here somewhere. But telling them in advance what you want to happen eliminates the chance of them saying to you, I'll think it over. Make sense? So introduce some rules. Then you go to town on the reason and you ask loads and loads and loads of really good qualification questions, some really challenging questions, the sorts of questions that none of your competitors will ever ask. Like, why doesn't that work? What did you try to solve and how did you try and solve it the last time? What sort of kickback did that give you? What does that feel like for your customers when you don't solve that problem? And you push and you make it difficult and challenging. Because until you can justify the reason why they would buy from you, I promise you they will always object. And so the third thing that we're going to put in here before we talk about our product and service is a justification. Someone comes to me and asks for negotiation training, we end up having a conversation that's not about negotiation at all. Because negotiation, the price only goes down. Actually, what their sales team want from me is a way of getting the price back up. They want the outcome, they want the result. So I sit down and I say, well, how many people in your sales team? They go, well, we've got 10. And how many people are underperforming? And they say at least 5. Okay, and what's their turnover they're supposed to get for you, their revenue each year? £1 million. And they're, what, struggling by how many percent? About 50%. So you're telling me there's 5 people in your team all losing out on £500,000 each. That's a £2.5 million problem you've got there. How much do you think someone would pay me to solve a £2.5 million problem? Well, how much do you think? £1,000? £10,000? £1 million? If I gave you £1 million and you gave me £2.5 million, I'd do that deal. You'd have my £1 million all day long. I'd much rather have an extra 1.5 million. I think most people in the room would agree. And that's the importance of justification. Until you get yourself to a situation where you make their problem real and you justify the reason why they need to take action, you've got no chance of avoiding the it's too expensive problem. But once you find out how big that problem is, and you recognise that my training's only £15,000 to solve a £2.5 million problem, do you think I'm going to get some pushback? Possibly not. And that's how you eliminate these things called objections. Folks, I'd love to spend a lot longer with you, but I'm running out of time. My advice to anybody who's interested, if you want to know any more, then please come and talk to me. I'll be outside and I'm around the room for the next 2 hours. I'd love to speak to anybody who's got any challenging questions on sales. I'll do whatever I can to help you. The last thing I will say to you is this. If you decided to get really clear on your ideal customer profile, if you definitely put in place some rules to protect both you and them to make sure that they could never ever say to you, give me a couple of days, I'll come back to you. If you could eliminate that just by putting rules in, I think that would be a plus point. if you're willing to invest the time to spend more quality questioning skills on justifying the reason why they buy, and you found out that the problem that they had with the solution that you've got is significantly bigger than the investment they're going to make, I promise you they will never ever tell you it's too expensive again. And that, folks, is going to allow you to do this. You can start charging what you're worth. Thank you very much indeed for your time.